Thank you for having me. I've had an absolutely spectacular day with colleagues here at Exeter, and I'm looking forward to this. What you just saw was a very planned um, demonstration of where the world is going. Keep making plans. We call them treaties, we call them COPs, and then they don't work. And that's what I'm going to talk about today in the environmental realm. But as I said, it's a great pleasure to be here. My name is Adil Najam. I have the great honor and privilege, as was mentioned, to serve currently as the president of WWF. Although I'll come in a minute, I'm going to try to speak more in my academic capacity. I have long known of the great stuff, great work that goes on at this university. And so when I was asked by Khurram to visit, I was delighted to jump on that. And as I said, I've had a wonderful day learning about all the wonderful environmental stuff that's being done here. The only question I leave with is, do they work on anything other than environment? Uh, because there is so much happening. Anyhow, I want to share a few thoughts, and then I hope get into a conversation with all of you on what's happening to the planet, particularly in terms of climate change. Not as much what's happening to climate change, but what is happening to us because of climate change, and you'll see what I mean by that. There's a long set of sort of whatever descriptions here, but I come from Pakistan. I've had the great pleasure also of serving as Vice Chancellor of a university in Pakistan, the Lahore University of Management Sciences. And as I said, I want to share you today as a fellow academic. Like all of the things I ever do, I did take advice from the panda. And the panda always gives me good advice, but I do not speak for the panda today. I have colleagues from WWF who can tell you more about it, and as will I. I don't think I'm going to say anything that is not that my colleagues will dispute. But I really wanted to talk about where the field that many of us, I assume, in this room, that we work on is. Right? And in that sense, now you might notice there, if you have been wondering why the hell I would be the president of WWF, that picture is the answer. I'm told I look like a panda, and that's the only qualification you need. And it's a qualification I'm proud of. I want to raise three questions. I promise not to answer any of them. They are not the type of questions that can easily be answered. That is why they are, I think, good questions, because they are the type of questions that we need to ponder upon as we move forward. The first and most important question is, what is the climate telling us? Not what the Center for Environmental Intelligence is telling us, not what a professor is telling us, not what the IPCC is telling us. All of those are important things. Those we cover. But what is it that's happening outside that window? And I'm making a big proposition here that intelligence of literally what's happening outside that window is as important to what happens in terms of our climate policy today, which is different from even a few years ago. Right? So the first question is, what is the climate telling us outside that window? I will come to that. The second is this thing that for the last now more than a dozen years, I've been trying to propagate this idea that we are in the age of adaptation. And what does it mean to be in the age of adaptation? How many, I assume most people here are climate people, environment people, know what climate change is? Anyone who's not? Okay, everyone is, right? So I know this, it's very basic, I'll just repeat it. We talk about mitigation, we talk about adaptation, and now we are forced to talk about loss and damage. I see them as three different steps. Mitigation, very simply, is there's a problem that could happen. I don't want it to happen, so I take steps to mitigate it from happening. Adaptation is the failure of mitigation. It is not the opposite of mitigation. Because if I don't mitigate in time, then there will be impacts. I will have to adapt. And in my view, loss and damage is the failure of adaptation. In the sense, if I'm not able to adapt to them, I will suffer a loss, a damage. for which I will have to pay. In some ways, I'm being again sort of jumping here, but it's an important jump. Mitigation policy is what we've usually talked about most of our lives. Mitigation policy is mostly innovation investment, idea, EVs, new technologies, better windows, better buildings, things. Not all of them are, but a lot of them are there. Adaptation investment, I have argued as a developing country person for many years, is much more like development or can be like development investment. It can have development benefits. And loss and damage investment, this is why we don't want to get there, is very much like relief, right? You got hit, now flood has taken away my home, I need to rebuild it. As opposed to adaptation, I'll build a better home so that before the flood comes, I'm better protected. As opposed to I will reduce my emissions so that the flood doesn't come. Right? The age of adaptation idea is a very simple proposition here that for most of our life, we have been focused on the idea of mitigation. I'm not anti-mitigation. Mitigation is the best thing you can do because the less you mitigate, the more you'll have to adapt. Right? But here is the reason I'm pointing this out. Mitigation policy has essentially been energy policy. Because in a way, if you think about mitigation, mitigation is do something so that the rain doesn't happen. Adaptation is buy an umbrella. Right? Adaptation is a superhuman power. The superpower we have as humans forever has always been adaptation. Right? It gets cold, I get a sweater. It rains, I buy an umbrella. The problem from a policy perspective is an umbrella has costs. And then the battle is who pays for the cost of the umbrella? The one who caused the rain or the one on whom the rain falls? The rain, it raineth every day on rich and poor fella, but more on the poor because the rich has his umbrella, right? We won't go there. But the point I'm just trying to make is this distinction is important. As long as we were focused primarily and only on mitigation, climate policy essentially boiled down mostly to the management of one molecule, the carbon molecule. Because most of emission is related to hydrocarbon, all of it. And therefore, mitigation policy was reducing hydrocarbon. Therefore, what can I do to manage carbon? So for generations, you and I have trained young people to become carbon managers. The age of adaptation, and the reason I'm taking time here, essentially explodes the climate problem to much more than carbon. Because while causation is mostly hydrocarbon, impacts is a lot of other things, right? So I hope that point is taken. I've taken a little time on it. Let me move on. I'll come back to that. How is climate change changing how we think about climate change? And that, again, is a central proposition that because climate change is now happening, for most of our life, climate change was a problem I wanted to avoid. You move into a world where it is no longer avoidable. It may be manageable, but that heat wave in Europe, the flood happening literally as we speak in Pakistan, the fires about to happen in Los Angeles, essentially means we are now in a world where climate change is happening. And my proposition is that changes how we need to think about climate change. And by that, I mean policy. The proposition I have, I'm sorry I've taken a little time on that, but I hope sort of that sets the tone of what I want to argue about. The proposition I have is the following. Now, that's too many words to put up on a screen, so let me make it easy for you. The age of adaptation, what I was trying to introduce, I am arguing fundamentally changes. I'm not using that word lightly. Change, the constant changes happen all the time. Change is actually the normal, the norm. But some changes are fundamental. They're fundamental because they structurally and systematically change other things. And I'm arguing what we are seeing is a fundamental change. A change in what? The nature of climate policy and the nature of climate politics. And that fundamental change in climate policy is in what you have seen and will see in what we do domestically, locally, nationally, in the name of climate, right? Which again has been mostly carbon management, build better cars, do more solar, right? All carbon driven. To now think about where you live, how you live, and so on and so forth. And politics is what you will see and are seeing in COPs and international negotiation, international treaties. The bottom line, I won't go too much into it, but the bottom line for me is international climate politics is becoming and will become more tense, more conflictual, because the stakes are now real. And it invites us to consider how we conceptualize what we mean by climate action. Right? And again, I know I'm being pedantic about it. Mitigation is adaptation is the failure of mitigation, but it is not the opposite of it. Right? So if I'm arguing for adaptation, I'm not arguing against mitigation. I'm just saying that we are now in a world where you cannot afford not to do the later. And I hope we can construct a world where we don't have to do loss and damage more and more, because that is the worst type of investment that you can do. I'm going to, sorry, I should have, I'm going to skip that. It's fun, but it's too long. So let me jump to something, and then we've come very quickly to the main proposition. Life after Paris. People understand what I mean by Paris, right? Paris Agreement. Treaty we love to love. Not because it is good, but because it was the last straw. And it was too hard to accept that there wasn't really much in it. There isn't really. But still, all of us, me included, very much me included, I was there at Paris. I'm a creature of the COPs. I was at COP -1. I was at COP -2. I was at every COP until Copenhagen. I promised myself never again. Broke the promise in Paris. It took me 3 hours to realize I had made a mistake. Made the promise again, and then broke it again 2 years ago at Dubai, mostly because of my current responsibilities. But I'm a friend of the COPs. Right? It's just that 30 years of negotiating is a little much. And not coming to an agreement, but we can come to that. Life after Paris. Why am I saying this? Right? So we are, I assume, all fans of Paris in the sense that whatever we mean by it, we would like it to be achieved. Right? I'm assuming I'm in a friendly room where we want to make progress. Right? And there are essentially two numbers that came out of Paris. For those who followed it then or later. The first number was this. This used to be a big number. What is the number? 100 billion. But right after Paris, when I would put it up, there would be a wow in the room. Because it seemed like such a big number, an overwhelming number. People would try to count how many zeros because we weren't used to seeing hundreds of billions. Right? And the reality now is, A, it never showed up. He kind of knew it at Paris. That's fine. You can make nice promises because they at least make the push that we will try. But what really is, the reason I put up the number is, what used to look like a really big number no longer looks like a big number. Anyone wants to guess why? I mentioned I'm from Pakistan. There were floods 2-3 years ago, 22. This current flood, which is technically bigger, no one talks about it anyhow. According to the World Bank, one flood, clearly, according to everyone, triggered by climate. Cost of that flood, according to the World Bank's first estimate, $32 billion. That was happening at the exact same time there are fires in Los Angeles and Australia, heat wave in Europe. Right? So suddenly 100 billion doesn't look very large, especially when it didn't appear. The second is we had this thing called COVID in between. And COVID was an experiment in teaching all of us what big numbers really look like. Right? Why it says there isn't money? They don't mean there isn't money, they just mean there isn't money for you. Right? So I live in the US. It took the US Congress 5 days to invent, literally from the blue, $1 trillion and 7 days to run out of that. Those checks that were sent before the end of that bout of COVID, the US had printed 6.75 trillion. The EU, I think, had printed something like 2.5. China had printed about 3. Right? So we suddenly realized that these numbers need to be sort of thought of differently. But this is important to the argument that the scale of the problem changed in our mind. Right? What seemed like an impressive number, 100 billion, suddenly doesn't seem big enough. The last COP was already talking a trillion. Right? It wasn't even able to raise millions, but it was talking trillion. And the second number, so this was monopoly money. The second number is more important. Right? I'm going to sound depressing, but I'm really not trying to depress, I promise you. The second number is more important, and the second number is really a combination of two numbers. You have heard them again and again, 1.5 and 2. Right? 2 is what the countries went in saying we will try to keep it under 2-degree global change. 1.5 essentially happened because the smallest and island states and vulnerable countries said, please, 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 2 is too late. I'm nearly gone by 2. Right? So the treaty, if you read it, said we will attempt to keep it under 2, but we will also try, wink, wink, to keep it under 1.5. I hope, I wish, I pray, I will give my anything at all to be wrong on this. But at this point, there is no science I know that can honestly claim that we will keep it under 1.5. Most scientists, I think, there are people who've been with the IPCC, etc., will tell you we've probably crossed or are about to. We can come back. We can overshoot, then take better decisions and come back. Right? I wish I'm wrong. I spent my whole life wanting to be wrong, but on this one, I really want to be. But there's just no science. And this is a difficult thing to say because my friends would usually push back and say, don't say that. People will lose hope. They will stop trying. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to sort of ignite the urgency of this. And I tell you why partly the urgency battle was lost, because we kept thinking about climate change as a future issue. I think one of the mistakes many of us who teach made was we kept putting these scenarios, these models, 2070, 2100, 2200, and we were giving young people the idea as if we had time. I'm going to use the next few slides to point out why that was wrong. Anyone remember? So I made a kind of vow to myself. I don't always follow it, but I try to not to put up graphs that are in the future anymore, because it kind of gives this idea as if we have time. So I tried to put up things that are recent enough that they're in our memory. Remember 2020? What do you remember of 2020? COVID. It was a year like no other, right? I was a dean, like many, I wrote memos. Oh, this is a year like no other. Thank you for all your effort. You are so good. And so on and so forth. We were trying to buck each other up, cheer each other up. And there are two great diseases that came in 2020. One was COVID. The other was? Anyone? The great disease of 2020 that hasn't yet gone? Zoom. The only good thing Zoom gave us was the ability to put a background behind us. That is me teaching my class on sustainable development during COVID with half the students in the room. That's why I have the mask and most of them. But that's not the point. I want to remind you what else was happening in 2020. I can promise there are people in this room who tweeted this and then forgot about it. But this is why I'm purposely putting something that's recent enough in our memory. January 2020. Remember January 2020? Probably not. Hottest month ever recorded at that time. It was on every newspaper. It was on your Twitter feed. You probably retweeted it. February, second hottest February ever recorded since we had been recording global temperatures. Right? Just trying to remind you, this is not very far off. Right? Everyone in the room should be able to remember this. March, second hottest. April, second hottest ever. May, hottest May ever recorded till that time. June, hottest June ever recorded since we had been recording. July, second hottest. August, second hottest. You get the pattern, hottest, third hottest, hottest, and then you get a little respite for Christmas. 8th hottest December ever. What's striking about this one? What strikes you about this slide? Right.
Is this just a 1 year thing, or has this been?
Very good. It was just a 1 year thing. What is striking about this slide is every one of them have been broken since. This was the aberration. This was the new norm. This was the new norm. The dancing cat came back on our Twitter feed because it got boring to just say another record had been broken. You will see this in just a minute. I'm not making this up, right? We all saw this. I will tell you this. This was literally done on a train over an iPhone. The date on this tweet is 29th of April, 2022. I just looked up what was happening where I come from in South Asia. And on that day, nearly 1 billion people, yes, 1 billion, across South Asia were seeing temperatures of over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. In some cases, over 117. This is not normal. We are in South Asia, we are pretty okay with heat. We can deal with 100, but not in April, not for 1 billion people. Right? So yes, it was one, but now there was a pattern. Okay, so I'm selectively choosing data. This literally, I haven't changed the slide because I was giving a talk early August in Pakistan. I think it was 1st of August or 2nd. And does anyone remember July 23? Again, I'm just randomly putting this up to make this point that climate is no longer a future issue. Till then, the highest temperature ever recorded was here. Till the 2nd of July, highest global temperature ever recorded was this dotted line. 3rd of July, break the record. 4th of July, break the record again. 5th of July, equal the record just broken. 6th of July, break the record again. 7th of July, we are too bored, we are back to the dancing cat. Every day in the month was higher than the single highest day of global recorded temperature ever since we were recording. I'm not trying to scare people. Essentially, I'm saying something changed. What changed, I'm arguing, is from being a future issue, climate became a current reality. Right? Again, this was May of 2024. Some of you might have lived through it here in Europe. You can find yourself in South Asia. You can find yourself in the US in that map. This is this morning. This is this morning. It's actually pretty cool, right? Cool right now. Essentially, that map is is temperature at every place 2 meters above sea level. And the red essentially shows how much above the mean for the period 79 2000 you are. Right? You can get this map every day. This is the page that opens when I open my computer. Right? So this is as I was coming in on the train this morning. I just looked it up for today. If you really want to understand it, this is also today. It's been a cool year, actually. It's been a much better year. Last year was the hottest year. This is yesterday. Right? The way to understand that graph is very simple. This is the global norm. Right? All this mess. These dotted lines are those periods, bands. And we constantly, every day, break that. Right? Again, this is not about scaring. This is simply about saying something has changed. That's the new norm. We will get used to that. At least those of us who can. This year promises to be not as warm as last year, but even not being as warm means way warmer. If there is anyone in this room, I hope I get the number right. If there's anyone in this room 42 years or younger, how many people 42 years or younger? You, sir, have never in your life therefore seen a colder than average year in your life. If you're 42 years old. Right. So again, I'm belaboring the point, but the point needs to be labored before we come to the point. Now, you may say that is fine, but is that really sort of Are you choosing data? So here is, again, this is not the future, this is the past. Every year that we have, for every month that we have global temperature, since we have been recording temperature, right? This is the global temperature. That's where we are. So that certainty well, the sadness with which I said the 1.5 is nearly not possible anymore is this. Right? Now, just touching that line doesn't mean we've crossed 1.5 because that's calculated in a different way. Now, some of you are saying that's fine, professor, but I don't live on the whole planet. I live in Exeter, and it was a beautiful day here today, and it was cool. Right? People don't live on the whole planet. This average of the planet, what the hell does that mean? I live in a particular place on the planet, so choose your place. Same data, we put it up on the world map for every place that we have data for. Right? And again, what is being mapped there is the anomaly. How much above or below the average, right? 35, 36, 40, 47, 48, so on and so forth. Choose your place and see what is happening to the world. You can also, if you read the years carefully, correlate it to what else is happening in the world in terms of both emissions, etc. Right? The only point I'm trying to make is climate change is no longer a future. That 1.5, if I'm right, and I wish I'm wrong, what does that mean? Someone of you would be saying, what is 0.5 degrees between friends? Right? It changed 5.5, half a degree between last hour and this hour. We're talking global temperature here. Right? So again, we have IPCC colleagues here. They can talk more about this, but here is what 1.5 is between friends. I won't go through all of it. This is the IPCC report, now a few years old, which looks at what a 1.5 degree change can do to the world. The interesting thing is when it was written, it was supposed to be about what we should try to not happen. And now it is about what is likely to happen. Extreme heat goes 2.6 times more. Sea ice, this is, I think, one of the most dangerous things that is clearly now happening, right? That the Arctic sea ice is melting much faster than most people thought. A lot of things that climate science has been wrong on have been things where science was more conservative, because science is always conservative, right? And what we found is that feedback loops are such that once the system takes over, it becomes worse. The 2.6 doesn't mean it becomes 2.6 times more than what you experienced, but the difference is 2.6, right? So this is serious stuff. This is serious stuff for people living all over the planet. Again, I don't need to talk to you about that. Floods in Pakistan, fires, heat, drought in Africa. You can just look up your daily, wherever you get your news from. And that is, and I'm going to start wrapping up here, that brings us to this point that I had started with. If this is correct, then we are in the age of adaptation, meaning we are at the age of climate impacts. And what does it mean to live in the age of adaptation? More than that, what does it mean to your research and mine, which has been focused again on carbon management? So if it is no longer only carbon management, then what does climate policy look like, right? The original proposition I'd started with. Here is some glimpses of what I think it starts looking at. And I start with this idea of nature. We usually don't start here, we start with other things, but if I ask you or my WWF colleagues, imagine a picture, tell me a picture you would use to express nature and climate, or the impact of climate change on nature. What photograph would you use?
Yes.
That's a very good one. Usually it's the polar bear on a slab of ice, right? I think that's not a very good picture, mostly because I spoke to a bunch of polar bears and they don't trust us. They are not waiting on a slab of ice for me to come and save them. Essentially, what they said is, you guys are good at saving each other, and you think you're going to save us? Really? I think this is a standing joke amongst many species. Okay, I'm sorry. These pictures weren't supposed to come here, but they're still important. This is the picture that's supposed to come. I think if you start thinking of climate and nature, this is a much more or even more appropriate photograph. What happens when a mosquito comes and bites you? Right? Immediate reaction. Nature does the same. Nature is not going to wait for the next IPCC report. It hits back. It hits back in disease. It hits back in vector-borne. It hits back because survival is the primary mode of operation for us as a species and for every other species, which is, I think, why this is a more appropriate picture. My favorite picture is this beautiful creature, one of the most slick, the Lamborghini of the natural world. Straight lines, fur coat. People recognize this beautiful guy? Not just a mosquito. Who's that mosquito? Not just a mosquito. This is the dengue mosquito. Right? This is the king of the. We have people who work on health here. You work on health, right? And I say this with great deference because causality isn't there. But people worry about vector-borne diseases. When climate changes, it doesn't just change for us. It changes for species. The reason this beautiful fellow is up there is people do wonder why you are finding dengue mosquito on the foothills of the Himalayas. They have no business there. They're tropical. A lot of it happens because they go with my shoe and so on and so forth. But this question of what happens to nature when climate changes and how that impacts us is not a trivial question, right? So if my question is, what's the new agenda? Or what's the added agenda of what we mean by climate policy? This should mean for climate policy. I do think the most important cutting or the most immediate cutting edge issue is going to be water. Right? If I tell my students at least, water is, this is, by the way, if you remember anything from this talk, I hope it is this line. Everything else is fluff. Everything else is fluff. My best sense of looking at the future is water is to adaptation, what carbon was to mitigation. Right? Carbon was mitigation because that's how you use. Think about impacts. Not all of them, but most of them, or many of them are wet. What happens when climate changes? Climate changes, water rises, sea level rises. Climate changes, water melts. Glaciers. Climate changes, water disappears. Drought. Climate changes, water falls from the sky like no one's business. Extreme events and floods. Right? And I haven't even come to the marine part. So I do think water is the cutting edge. That photograph at the back is what a flood looks like in Pakistan. That actually is from the 2010 floods. What no one talks about it, Pakistan has a constant above average flood since 2010 every year. We're in 2025. In 2010, I and friends were trying to raise support for people who were becoming homeless because of floods, because flood is not just your basement. So I put up this map, and I put this up to give you a sense. Again, this is one country. The problem is also, if it's one country and one flood, our generosity will kick in. But in a climate changing world, it's going to be many places and many calamities. Right? There isn't generosity enough. It's not that we are bad people. It's simply resources. So what do floods look like in a country like Pakistan? This was the flood. The current flood is slightly bigger than this, but all you need to remember is this blue squiggly, right? So with respect to my geography friends, I'm sorry I'm intruding into your world, but take the blue. That blue is high or severely, moderately or severely flooded areas, like in that picture. So I took that blue squiggly, and to help and to explain this to my students and my friends, I put the same to scale on a map of the US. That's what it looks like, from the border of Canada to down Florida. That same squiggly, the flood in Pakistan, on a map of Japan. You don't see Japan. right? So when you read of a flood in India or in Bangladesh or Pakistan or many other places, imagine that scale, right? This is not a street. Same flood, same squiggly put on a map of Europe, Denmark down to Spain, right? And again, this is not about victimhood. This is not about sort of sympathy. What I'm saying is, if we are right in the age of adaptation, then the challenge before us academics is that natural disasters are, when they become no longer natural, also change in scale. We have an entire operation of these disasters that assumes that these disasters are going to be not very frequent. You change that assumption, and you will have to change policy, and that wouldn't have to do with climate emissions. That will have to do how you do relief, how you do development, and so on and so forth. Okay, I've spoken too much, so let me just rush through at least a few. I won't say much about this, but if food is the issue, then if water is the issue, then clearly food is the issue, right? Because what is food except nature's way of packaging water? Exactly. But essentially, there is a great correlation. I don't need to talk about it. All of you know much more about this. Energy, which we are very used to thinking about in the age of mitigation. Energy is, and there's a lot of good things happening. I think there's an energy transition happening. I do not worry about it. I do not think it can be stopped. There is simply a cost curve there, right? I think that energy transition is real, irrespective of who's in charge in what country. It cannot be stopped simply because of the force of these two graphs, right? Price changing. I won't go into it. The energy crisis I worry about is this kid, because in the age of mitigation, the energy problem is what? Convince people to use less energy. In the age of adaptation, you start from the assumption that there are at least 2 billion people in the world for whom the energy problem is energy poverty. They're using too little energy. Right? You go and tell that kid you're using too much energy. Right? And so it becomes a different sort of problem, not simply about creating cheaper solar panels, but getting them to the 2 billion who are underutilizing energy, basic energy needs, right? And that has security issues and stuff that I won't go into. That was the report I was part of. Mobility. Mobility, we have decided, and I think we've done fairly well, as an EV problem, right? The Tesla problem. Once you start looking at also from a development and adaptation lens, the mobility problem is this. Mobility problem is not just my car is guzzling too much gas. The mobility problem is the people who need to move from point A to B in a half decent fashion, right? So essentially, I know I'm rushing through these. These are not made up pictures. These are not fake pictures. But what I'm saying is, if we are dealing with climate in this age of adaptation, our challenges, not just challenges, our opportunities also increase. The good news is all of this is most of the things you are seeing, do them and you get better development. Show me a good adaptation project, I will show you a good development project. Right? This may be a once in a generation development leapfrogging opportunity, I would like to believe. I may be fooling myself, but that's what I would like to believe. Right? So again, the proposition with all of these is the problem changes. Infrastructure. I was just in this beautiful, wonderful, environment-friendly building. We are building buildings in Boston, where I am. And every building is, the architects have done some of the most wonderful things, like what's happening with windows, what's happening with building technologies. The school I'm building a new building, it will be the tallest all wood structure in Boston, 17 stories high, all wood, right? Because the technology is there. But if you are, again, that 1.5 billion in this case, people who live like this, the infrastructure challenge and opportunity with these new technologies is a totally different one. I think, well, the word is coming already, so you know this is waste. I'm sure people know what this picture is. Does anyone know what this picture is? Okay, I'll give you a close up. Waste bottles. I'll give you a further close up. That picture is 2 million plastic beverage bottles, the numbers used in the US every 5 minutes in 2007. The numbers used now in Karachi or Lahore or Mumbai are even more. This is no longer your standard south or north problem, right? But the waste issue becomes a different issue also in this age of adaptation. I'm sorry. So I hope this will show. If not, we will just move on. But this, I think, is one of also my most disappointing ones, because this we should have licked, and you'll see exactly what this is in a minute. Those were early estimates from research done with Australian universities and so on and so forth. There's a lot of much better, wonderful work being done now. Whatever the numbers are, even if those numbers are wrong, what seems to be clearly not wrong is there isn't a child being born in the world today anywhere without plastic in them. It may not be as bad because plastic sort of, because it is so sturdy, can get out of your system, but we are changing literally the physiology of our species. I have taken too much, so let me just cut through a few slides and then shut up. I want to show this one, and then I will come to my conclusion and shut up. And I apologize for this. These are not pictures that should be seen. But the reason I want to put this up is it is a totally solvable, easily doable proposition. Right? And yet, in many places, we are choosing not to do it. In my country, in Pakistan, in Karachi, there used to be 4 seasons. Now there are 5. This whole belt from Karachi into India, into Mumbai, mainly into Dhaka. You can go, you can know exactly when it will start, you know exactly when it will end. In Karachi, it will probably have 400 people dying. In Mumbai, it will have probably 600 people dying. It's kind of like clockwork, because the 5th season is extreme heat. And it has become so predictable. The reason I really wanted to put this is it is so easily doable. The solutions are essentially hydration and shade, because the people who die are nearly all homeless people or people, migrants, who are working out in the sun. The heat itself is not as so great that they should die, right? So this is true for every major city in the region. Some of it is climate change, some of it is just bad urban planning. But the pictures that we are seeing again and again every year are not pictures that should be seen. This is the point I'm saying is we have the ability. It's not even very expensive, right? We should not be, which we should not have to see this every year. The point this by the way, I'm sorry. These are coffins of unclaimed bodies, because as I said, most of those who will die will be on the street because they are migrants. There's no one to claim them, and then long graves are dug and they are buried in that. But that's the heat challenge. And again, I know it in a way it's the wrong thing to end on because it sounds like it's depressing. But what I'm saying is, with a bunch of these things, there is an opportunity to use climate as a truly sort of mind-bending or policy-bending proposition. So what might it take? What are the stories we need to tell ourselves about climate change if I am at all right about these 4 points, and then I shut up? First, we need to think about climate as mostly energy to mostly everything. That does not mean that, because if you think everything, then you think nothing. That means we have to listen to you, right? The system part, that you link that to other issues. And that, I think, is intellectually the biggest of the opportunities and the challenge. The second, we need to think about climate as an act of trying to maximize security to an act of minimizing insecurity. Right? What is maximizing insecurity? I'm going to try to make myself safe from whatever the impacts are. And insecurity is I'm going to give myself resilience by making myself less insecure to the potential damages, right? If you make policy on wanting to maximize security, you focus on bad behavior, and the focus of policy is to reduce bad behavior, right? We can go into it. I am not right now. If you focus on policy that is trying to minimize insecurity, you reward good behaviors, you incentivize good behavior. To do that, not always, but mostly, right? From a policy sort of perspective. The third thing you move, this is the most difficult, especially today on this date. Somehow, at some point, we'll need to move from thinking international to thinking global. That doesn't mean international goes away. Somewhere in the 60s, for the very first time ever, we actually saw the place we live in. Right? We'd never actually seen it before when the first pictures from space came. And we realized those lines really weren't there, blah, blah, blah. And we haven't yet reconciled to that idea. Why am I saying this? International means between nations. You go to a COP, an international negotiation, you represent your country, I represent my country. The play acting we do is you will seek what's best for yours, I will seek what's best for mine, and the assumption is that the sum of the two will be the best for everyone. That logic just simply does not work, especially when you have global issues like this. Difficult, but it requires thinking as a species rather than thinking as nations. I put it up. I don't have hope, but I still at least project. And finally, on the age of adaptation, moving from thinking of adaptation as a problem to now thinking also of it as a set of solutions. You think of it as a problem, you think of it as potential costs. You think of it as a solution or an opportunity, you think of it as social justice. My apologies in my gluttony for wanting to talk to you. I've put way too much into those slides, much more than I really should have. Of that. But here we are. Thank you so much.